be a very exciting and entertaining and engaging panel, I'm sure, on psychology in the age of big data and AI. I am not participating in the panel. I am Jamie Derringer. You've probably received some emails from me about this. I'm very excited that we are organizing this series, and so I am happy to keep bothering you with emails and to take this opportunity with your rapt attention to advertise the next two events that we're going to have in this series, the first Friday of each of the next 2 months. On October 3rd, we're going to have a featured speaker. Assistant Professor Benedict Curdy is going to be giving a talk on malleability of racial evaluations in response to counter-attitudinal exemplars, which will feature Professor Eleanor Seaton as our Q&A moderator to help guide the discussion after Professor Curdy's speech. And then on November 7th, we will have another panel discussion on lifespan development, which is featuring Dr. Joe Cohen, Dr. Nu-Chu Lang, Dr. Jessica Montag, and Dr. Karen Rudolph will serve as our moderator. So without further ado, I will hand things over to today's moderator, Professor D.A. Briley.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you all for being here today. It's good to see you all together combined. I am Ava Briley. I am an associate professor in the general division. I am the associate head for diversity and inclusion. And I'm excited about AI. I'm excited about the potential for LLMs to serve as universal translators, to allow us to talk to a computer, right, in natural language, to accelerate and open our research to make it more accessible, not less. I think there's a lot of promising tools and avenues for this, and there's also a lot of challenges. There's many potential pitfalls that AI can come in contact with, things like censorship, things that control the information that we see. That's a really powerful tool. And it can also write computer code for you, your R code. It can do that kind of stuff, which is kind of nice and exciting. This is about all the intro that I wanted to give. Oh, wait, no, sorry, I lied. One other thing I wanted to mention, I'm teaching my SEM course now using LLM tools to help us with code, to help us interpret things. It's a learning process. There are benefits and there are downsides. It can affect the way you critically evaluate things. So these are things that we need to think about as teachers, as researchers, educators. How are we going to engage with this new technology? I'm curious to hear how our panel has been engaging with this technology, either in their research, their teaching, and to introduce themselves as well. So I'll pass it over to Leo, and we'll just go down the line.
Hello, everybody. My name is Leo Alexander III. I'm an assistant professor jointly appointed between the School of Labor and Employment Relations and the Department of Psychology. I'm broadly interested in personnel selection, adverse impact, which is fairness in hiring, how new technologies influence the world of work and selecting employees, how organizations select, promote employees generally. So that's my area of focus that surrounds artificial intelligence and big data.
I'm John Willits. I'm an assistant professor in the cognitive area of the psychology department. My area of research is language and semantic development and learning and knowledge representation. I've been studying large language models since way before they were cool and way before they were called that. And so I'm really interested in the relationship they have with human learning and cognition and what they can and can't tell us about that. I'm also, just because I study learning on the teaching side of things, I have a lot of strong opinions about teaching pedagogy and have been really teaching the intro brain and cognitive science courses, seeing the impact of that. Very worried about us accidentally sliding into the future where teachers are using LLMs to make the assignments, the students are using the LLMs to do the assignments, and then the teachers are using the LLMs to grade the assignments, and I don't know what will be happening then. So that's another thing I'm very interested
My name is Susu Zhang, and I'm a joint associate professor between quantitative psychology and statistics at UIUC. And my research is related to AI in two ways. First, I study how do we solve measurement tasks like testing for psychological and educational constructs using more open-ended types of responses like test-taking log data, as well as like open-ended response like constructed response data. At the same time, I collaborate with computer scientists in terms of whether we can generalize some of the methods we have for assessing humans, like the psychometric methods and the test development principles to the assessment of large language model capability in terms of assessing, say, AI safety, large language model ranking and capability assessment, etc.
Excellent, thank you so much. I think this is a good representation of the benefit and power of having in this sort of colloquium. We have a measurement assessment kind of person, we have a societal impact, we have big theory. We need to be talking with each other for especially this kind of technology that's going to impact all of us. It's going to impact all of our work. So thank you all for being here, I appreciate it. I wonder if you've experienced, or if you have, you've already mentioned a little bit of, it could change what it means to be a psychologist, what it means to do our research, or maybe it shouldn't. I don't know. How do you see the advent of these tools, research becoming, there's a process to automate, right? How do you see that changing the way you feel about being a psychologist, the way you carry out your work?
Well, for me, I firmly believe that it shouldn't change what it means to be a psychologist, and it might, or it definitely, in my opinion, expands the toolbox that we need to carry out our job, especially in my case, where the focus of my research is very much applied, and whether it's a good idea or not, big data, AI, machine learning is going to be employed to make very impactful decisions in our society. And I kind of see part of our role as researchers to be the watchdogs that at least send out warnings and critically evaluate the uses of new technology. It expands to carry that function out. That function I perceive as part of our jobs. I think we need to expand our toolboxes in terms of like our understanding of quantitative methods, our techniques that exist to evaluate quantitative methods and new technologies in their use.
So I actually do much less substantive psychological research compared to other folks on the panel. However, I do want to quote, related to what Leo has said, I do want to quote something I heard from a research scientist at Microsoft Research a couple of weeks ago. So this was a person who works on large language model evaluation and AI safety research, and a computer scientist. He said that we definitely need some real psychologists on our team. And the reason is that they need someone, they're interested in assessing a lot of non-cognitive traits of these large language models, such as whether they are aligned with the human values, whether they exhibit certain types of biases and personalities. And they need people and real psychologists who are familiar with the theory and the literature, instead of computer scientists who are just getting into interdisciplinary research in psychology, who might be familiar with some of the most famous theories in psychology and are just citing them all the time instead of the most recent and up-to-date results.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. There was a recently ChatGPT released a new version of their model, GPT-5, and people didn't like it at first. They thought, oh, it's so formal. Where's my friendly, nice chat friend? And the person who runs OpenAI said, we're going to invest a lot more in thinking about personality. And as a personality psychologist, that really perked my ears up. It does seem like there's a potential for an internship for students or other collaborations. I did grad school at UT Austin with Sam Gosling, and his real message was that we as psychologists, we have the interesting questions, and other people on campus have these really powerful tools. We need to integrate with them and help connect across. So I appreciate that. I think there's room for that. John, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think two big ways I would say that I think it's changing the work that I do and the work in the subfields I'm a part of is, so I mean, cognitive psychology is kind of a, I don't want to say special, it's different from a lot of the other branches from psychology historically in that for the last 30 or 40 years, the emphasis was very strongly on experimental work in the laboratory. And that is really make it different from social psychology and developmental psychology, which do some of that, but also do a lot of interesting work out in the world, studying naturalistic data. And one big thing that's been happening is that this has really been, I think, pushing cognitive psychology to take naturalistic data a lot more seriously. And now that we just have the tools to be able to gather it at the kind of scale we need to test the kind of questions we're interested in. So that's been one interesting change that I've seen over the course of my time that's become possible. I guess the other thing I would really say that I think that large language models are just, and other kinds of AI models are really forcing us to think a lot more deeply about a lot of theoretical ideas that were just underspecified. So there's just a lot of ways in which it's really, I think, calling attention to things. So, one of the things I study is, the question of what it means for a large language model to memorize something, right? And it's even just the very notion of that question is actually really hard once you think about it. Like, so if we want to argue about whether large language models are just memorizing their training data, it's actually surprisingly hard because our terms for what we even mean by that are challenging. And so I think large language models are doing a really good job stimulating the field by kind of exposing that a lot of the debates we were having were, because they were operating in such small power situations, like we weren't always really clear that some of our ideas were underspecified, and it's forcing us to come to terms with that.
Yeah, thanks. I was looking up data sets for a student who wants to look at video game play behavior. And so it makes me think of these gigantic data sets. I think it had 10 million observations of geospatial and all these kinds of things. There's a big world of data collection going on. Want to turn now to methods, and then we'll open it up to the audience to ask some questions, I think. I am curious, thinking about this, how has it impacted the way you think about methods? Are you using LLMs as a method rather than it's an assistant that helps me do spell check, right? So like, that's a different sort of relationship with this tool. How has it impacted the way you think about methods, you do methods?
So first of all, to answer the question of am I using it as part of my methods for research? For certain projects, yes. So I'm collaborating with some people in IO psychology and in personality in developing things like how can we score, say, interview data to understand people's personality profiles, and can we actually have a better understanding of the psychometric properties of like the LLM-based evaluations of people's, say, interview data in terms of how well they align with job performance, with the, their questionnaire responses on the psychometrically like well-established questionnaires for like personality assessments. So I think more in general, with LLMs that are becoming so common right now, one of the questions we're interested in when we are measuring traits might be, what are the new constructs that we might be interested in measuring? I do a lot of testing and cognitive testing, like educational testing that are used for admissions, or like credential licensing for, say, doctors and other professions. One of the questions they have right now is, are the skills that are going to be necessary for current and future labor markets the same Now we have people who can interact with large language models or AI to solve certain tasks. So one of the questions is, will we be more interested in measuring like how well people independently solve questions versus are we now more interested in how well someone, say, work with the machine together to write or to do some other tasks? Another thing we think about in terms of measurement and methodology is how AI now facilitates us to more easily and inexpensively develop new item types. So question development traditionally in testing is a very expensive task in terms of it can cost the testing companies a lot of money to develop test questions, especially complicated questions that involve, say, simulations or like scenario-based tasks. But now, large language model can make that a lot easier, and it also makes it possible for us to, say, do automated scoring and immediate feedback, which can be useful if we're designing, say, formative assessments that are for students to like do certain questions and give them feedback for learning purposes. And at the same time, I think another thing is these large language models bring new test security concerns. For like all of us who are teaching courses, there will be students who are using advanced AI models to solve some homework problems. Can we detect that? And at the same time, if we are collecting survey responses, then maybe people are now able to do like insufficient effort responding better. Now they have the assistance of all these AI agents to help them fill out the surveys. And will we be able to filter that out when we analyze our data? So that brings a lot of interesting methodological questions.
Well, for me, I can't think of too much of my work that actually uses AI as part of my method. Usually it's the subject of my research and evaluating the psychometric properties or comparing outcomes of using AI or big data in making decisions in the organization. I kind of believe in a lot of cases it's kind of, I have a stodgy old psychometrician's perspective in that, you know, I want to really know the psychometric properties of the methods I use to really firmly assert any conclusions from them. So, but I'm still excited and fascinated about the promises of you and the eventuality of incorporating the technology. It's not like I see it as a choice in the world of work, whether I allow or whether the researchers recommend it be used or not. Organizations are going to use large language models and AI models to make all kinds of decisions. And whether it's intentional or inadvertent, it's permeating everything from even when you don't know. Like if an organization uses a search engine on the internet to do something as part of their workflow, they've introduced AI whether they wanted to or not. So, like I said, most of my research the aim of it is to evaluate and compare these newer methods and try to glean what we can of the psychometric properties of them, much less than it's now a tool I use. And so.
Yeah, it's making its way into both my work and teaching in lots of ways. So one study that I have been working on for a while is a study where we are investigating children's everyday visual environments and what they might be able to learn from those. And so we had all of this data from kids wearing cameras on their heads. And we were interested in processing that. And so, you know, there's been just a lot of ways that at almost every step of the data processing and analysis pipeline, that project wouldn't have been possible without AI. So, you know, we can use AI to at least do things like first pass segmentation and labeling of those. We've also done a lot of that work by hand to verify that, you know, AI methods will be comparable to that. But even just some of the software tools, you know, there was a software tool I wanted to have exist to be able to do some of the data processing of this. And I kind of thought, well, maybe making that will be what I do on my first sabbatical. And then ChatGPT came out, and I made it over spring break when, like, and so there's just a lot of things that I think are facilitated now. I mean, on the teaching, my very first statement on teaching made it sound like I'm really, negative about the role of AI in education, and I have a lot of concerns, but it also has a lot of value, right? So when I teach BCog 100, I have students take a quiz every week, but they can retake the quiz a certain number of times, but they don't get the same quiz every time, and that would be a lot of work to generate. The volume of questions that you need to create to make that possible is a lot of work, but LLMs have made that a lot easier because I can give it, here are 20 questions on this particular topic, turn that into 100 for me. And I can kind of go through and, different rewordings or, reversing of the question and all this stuff that, yes, we could do by hand, but it can do it just so much faster. And so there are a lot of potential uses here at almost every level that I think are positive too.
Yeah, I'm curious about the comparison of the hand-coded to the LLM-coded. Been to a couple conferences, and this seems to be a regular feature of talks now, is you do the traditional version, and then you say, we wanted to see if an LLM could do it, and it does, and it's correlated at 0.8 or something with the hand-coded thing. Is that your experience?
It really varies by question and domain. There are some tasks, so like LLMs, or not actually LLMs, but even just like speech recognition kind of thing. So, we've all had speech recognition in our pockets for the last 10 or 15 years, but they're still pretty, that's still pretty limited, right? If it understands you, if you're speaking, clearly with the phone right in front of you, but you try to record, this is Jessica and her students have done a lot more with this, but recording in the home and then trying to use speech recognition to automatically transcribe the speech of multiple speakers, some of them children. There's a TV on in the background. There's lots of other weird noise. Like, it still is bad. And so there's some things where it's not helpful yet, but there's other things where, yeah, if you're asking it to do, like, there's a paper that just came out recently that was comparing LLM's performance on all sorts of like metalinguistic classifications, like grammaticality judgments of sentences and all kinds of things. And it was outperforming not just average humans, but linguistic graduate students at those kinds of things, right? So it's getting really good in some tasks.
Yeah, I think the thing that I found is the most personally intrinsically rewarding is this: I have a project I want to do, I have an end goal, I don't know how to get there, I don't know Python, I gotta be honest, I don't know anything about Python, but it's walked me through, and I've built a few of these sorts of things that actually work. I can verify and check. So yeah, there's a lot of potential utility there. Before I open it up to audience questions, anything that you're got holding on that you're like, I really meant to say that? Nothing? Yeah.
Can I comment on something related to LLM as a judge in terms of like asking it to do like rating of things? So my collaborator and I did a study that was evaluating how well large language model, if you just give these scoring rubrics to them, how well does it do in terms of producing scores that are agreeing with human experts. But that was in a setting when we are interested in using LLMs to evaluate LLM performance in like news summarization and tasks. Like some of the, like, I think when we did the paper, the most advanced model was maybe GPT-4o. It did a really good job achieving the highest degree of agreement with the human expert compared to a lot of the traditional methods. However, we also found that sometimes if you ask it, given the same rubric and the same answer, if you ask it to do it again, if your temperature of the model is not set to 0, sometimes it can give a pretty different score. So if you get like the test-retest reliability, asking them to do the same task, the exact same thing again, the reliability sometimes can be around like 0.9, which isn't bad, but telling you that there can be some fluctuations in every time it does things.
Good. Anyone want to lead us off with a question? I believe we have microphones.
Is that working? Yeah. Thank you. This has been really interesting. I wanted to ask, I guess, about the negative side. So we all know these LLMs make errors, they have biases, and it's quite hard to see that unless you're already an expert because they sound quite authoritative. I wonder how that aspect of LLMs has sort of reared its head in your work or your teaching.
I mean, so this is a topic I have a lot of opinions about. I mean, one of the things, so, hallucination is the term a lot of people have heard, right? That LLMs generate made up things, right? But hallucinations are just the flip side of generalization, right? A generalization is, like when I forget which one of my students, I think it was Zhang I did this to. I was like, I asked them, what did you have for breakfast this morning? And they gave me an answer. And then I asked them, I forget what it was, do worms have testosterone, right? And he got very shy and embarrassed and didn't want to answer the question. And eventually he guessed, and he guessed correctly. But it's the kind of thing where like we have these different kinds of knowledge and these different kinds of sort of epistemic criteria that to hold the different kinds of things. And I think like it's just really interesting to kind of think about how LLMs compare to what the alternative is in any given kind of situation, right? So if you ask ChatGPT to tell you something, like it will be wrong some of the time, right? And so will people. And it's not clear in any given domain, like what's more trustworthy. And I think this is just a big, interesting, open, empirical question in lots of different domains, right? I can read a Steven Pinker book, and there's a lot of interesting stuff in there, and a lot of factual claims, and also a lot of hallucinated nonsense. and so, like, I think we all have a responsibility, right? When you are reading something or hearing something, you have a responsibility to use your mind to evaluate the veracity of the information and to act on that appropriately. And that's true whether you're talking to ChatGPT or reading a book or reading a Reddit post or whatever, right? This is just something we have to do, and we just have to, like, I think the problem people fall into, right, is this assumption that LLMs are magically correct, and they're not. They make mistakes too because they are based on the very mistakes that we all make. So.
I think, it's amazing how well sometimes large language models can perform, like better than people in some cases, But we don't know a lot about when they're going to perform well and when they're not going to perform well, and how they're going to perform well and how they're not going to perform well. And I think one of the big considerations in when and how you're using them is the impact, the outcome, where they're being applied. So in organizations and personnel selection, which I'm in, when you're hiring somebody, it's a high stakes decision, super impactful, legal implications, a lot of liability involved. It's a situation that demands that we have answers to these questions. So in that context, it might not be as good an idea to employ them in certain ways, or definitely without checks. So far, right, it was mentioned earlier that understanding the psychometric properties of AI and large language models is important, because then we can begin to answer some of these questions in the way that we've been answering them about traditional methods for 100 years. We kind of like you were talking about, we kind of presume that human raters are infallible and these large language models do terrible things. Yeah, it's not true. Like, people are fallible too. Even our past methods are fallible. We just know how they're fallible more than we do these newer methods. So I think, the most impressive models, the problem is interpretability, that we can't make these predictions. Like we can make the predictions, but we can't understand how they're made necessarily. And the best you can do is audit them after the fact. like have them make a lot of decisions and see what they're doing right and doing wrong. So it makes it a big chore to understand the methods. So that's.
For me, I use large language models in my teaching, especially stats courses sometimes. For example, when I have to translate code from one language to another, I develop agents for doing that. It keeps doing the wrong thing. Even if I keep telling it and make sure that I give it the correct directions, it always keeps doing the wrong things sometimes, and it's the same mistakes over and over. So I do see these hallucinations playing out in even these simple tasks of just translate this. You don't have to create anything new, just translate this to that. I was wondering, so when I had homework or open-ended, open book exams for the students, whether large language models can solve the exam questions for me. Sometimes they can, but it's correct about half of the time. So I think in order for someone to benefit from using large language models to solve certain tasks, it really takes expertise about judging, is the quality of the outcomes high? And so far I don't know whether without the learning of the things on your own first and going through all the pain, whether you develop the same degree of depth in your knowledge and in your expertise of judging the quality of the responses. And in terms of, in general, AI doing unsafe things, I think there are quite a lot of examples already of how GPT or other kinds of large language model exhibit similar biases and prejudices we see in humans because it's trained on human data. When you ask it to complete a sentence that's semi-sensitive, sometimes it can give very incorrect responses to those. And it can give toxic responses sometimes, like how people talk online in very toxic ways. So I think maybe that's why there are a lot of AI safety grants and initiatives right now where they're trying to get people and substantive experts to do red teaming, try to design ways that you can get these models to make mistakes so that you can identify them early enough to fix them before deploying them in practice.
Actually, I want to say one more thing before we move on from this. I think as a rule of thumb for people when you're thinking about it yourselves, right? I mean, it is helpful to think about large language models are just a statistical snapshot of the input. And so to the extent that you feel like you have confidence that the question you are asking is correct and well represented out there in the world, you can probably trust what it's saying, right? So if you ask it what was the result of this behavioral experiment that you actually know was done hundreds of times and that there's lots of discussion about, it's going to tell you the right thing. If you ask it, do vaccines cause autism? It's going to tell you the modal thing that is said out there, right? Which is going to be the answer we want it to give. Now, if you ask it to tell you what happened in this one study and you make up the details of the study and you're an expert in the area and you're pretty sure that study has never been done before, it will make something up, right? And so it is helpful to have a sense of how frequent and variable the data is out there on what you're asking it about, because its answer is going to be really dependent on that.
Can I add one thing real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
And I often come off negative about the dangers. You're asking about the negative things, but sometimes the negative things can be positive depending on the context. I can think of one example. I asked a large language model to write some code for me to create a little applet so I could quickly calculate some hiring statistic indices. And it did it perfectly. It was the good part about it, but it added an indice I'd never thought before. And it made such sense that I believe that indice must be out there somewhere, and I scoured the reading, and it just put together ideas from different indices, and it made sense, and threw it on there. And it's an indice that I think should exist because it considers things that the others don't, and combines them together. So in that case, it made me think about maybe even writing a paper on we should look at this. So it's not always negative. It's negative if you don't have the knowledge to evaluate it, right? if I was, for instance, like if I was writing a paper for class and I was a student and thought that existed in the literature somewhere and started talking about it, then it's a negative outcome, you know. So.
Yeah, I wanted to add on, I think this is a big win for open science. The open science movement, we want to give our data away, we want to give our models, we want it to be freely available. For a while, the big ChatGPT-like models were proprietary. Meta, Facebook was one of the first people that said, we're going to release this open access, open science. You can get the full weights and play around with it however you want. So now you can go to these websites and download something that is essentially the Library of Alexandria. It has all this information in it, which you would need to verify later, of course, but it's all in just your phone. You could ask it anything you want. You run it locally. All your information just stays here. You don't have to send it to anybody. You don't have to have Sam Altman or anyone like that trying to control the information you get. To me, that seems like a very important thing to hold on to, and helps overcome some of these other obstacles. What I first wanted to say, though, was Susu mentioned making agents. I've been training this LLM agent to carry out different coding tasks, and I had this experience where it said, oh, I can't end the job until I do this thing, but I can't do this thing, so I'm just going to say I did it. I'm going to say job completed, and then I can end. And it made me very not scared for super intelligence anytime soon. They are so finicky when you try getting it all downloaded. Yeah, but it's a model. It's a statistical model that we can manipulate and think about like other models. Okay. Other questions? Yeah, Jamie will come over.
Thank you. So the way how I understand what you just said is that there is increased transparency now in like all these source codes kind of things, but I was actually just looking up ChatGPT again, and their code is proprietary, and a lot of people use this stuff. So there's still, I feel like there's still an issue of transparency that as a researcher in particular wants to understand what I'm doing when I do this kind of analysis. It makes me really squeezy. Yeah. So there's one thing. Is there anything that we can do as an academic community to increase this transparency? And then the other thing is, I'm a psychologist, and my field has been trying to understand the human mind for the last 150 years. Now we have a new actor in town. Do we need a new field that is kind of about the super psychology of AI or something?
I'll leave that one for you, but I'll take the first one. So ChatGPT, the website, if you go there, their model is more advanced than the open science, open source ones. It performs better on all these tests. They've done all these benchmarks. The open source ones lag behind about 6 months, 3 to 6 months, in terms of performance. So the current version of ChatGPT is proprietary. You pay for it or you use the free service. All your information goes to them, and they keep it forever because of legal ongoing disputes. But if you go to Hugging Face or you get LM Studio is what I use, there are these other places that you can go that host these files. So it's like OSF, but for large language models. And you can download them, you can train them and tune them to be just how you want them to be. You can take a big model and make it small, and so on. But yeah, I like your second question too, so I'm going to turn it over to y'all. Do we need new psychology to understand this, or is it just recreating the mind in a different way?
Do we need new psychologists to understand large language models? Or?
From the perspective of like the psychology of it, yeah.
So I've been to one AI safety conference last year, and there were some, to my surprise, there were a lot of psychologists and cognitive scientists and decision-making scientists there already who are trying to do the same kind of, say, what is it called, the moral experiments that we have designed for humans. How can we adapt them to the assessment of, say, how large language models solve these moral dilemmas? And I know Microsoft Research recently developed something called the Value Compass, which is they designed a lot of evaluation benchmarks for the non-cognitive traits that we hear about in large language model moral and ethics alignment with humans. So it does seem like some of the people are trying to adopt our psychological studies of humans to large language models already. Yeah.
I think the human brain is way more complicated than the LLMs. I don't know, I'm not on good neuroscience footing to say that, but I feel like it is. So I feel like the LLMs are just aping the mind. I don't know. John, you want to correct me?
Well, I mean, it depends in some ways on what things turn out to be true, both about the human mind and about the LLMs, right? So, like, sometimes I hear people complain about the horribleness of LLMs because they are obscure and inscrutable and we'll never understand how they work. And my gut reaction there is to say, well, if we can't understand how they can work, how could we ever understand how the mind can work, right? Because it's like a dream situation where we have the ability to know and control the exact state of its brain at any moment in time. We know absolutely every experience it ever had, right? Like, we don't have anything like that with neuroscience and with psychology, right? So, but it also, you know, if you are somebody that thinks that what the human mind is doing is something radically different than just a big statistical regression, if it's doing something special that is somehow taking that data and turning it into a much smaller set of abstract variables, right, then if that ends up being true, then the human mind will be more tractable and more comprehensible than just trying to understand a giant, you know, literally, you know, million-factor multivariate regression with hundreds of thousands of latent hidden variables, right?
Right,
So I think, you know, we don't know. Like, and then the LLM, though, through the use of doing that regression, could be ending up with discovering these more abstract general variables, right? So there's a lot to understand, both about how the LLMs work and about how the human mind works, I think, before. But I think, you know, I'm optimistic that the tools that like cognitive psychology and cognitive neuroscience and psychology more generally have developed will be useful for thinking about how LLMs work, but we'll probably also have to learn some new tricks.
As a personality psychologist, it's intuitive to me that language and the way we talk about other people, it's really important. It really guides how we think about each other, right, our characteristics. So, yeah, this makes, it seems clear to me why this would be interesting in recreating these functions. Other questions, thoughts for the audience? Dan.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on the ethics of LLMs. About an hour ago, Anthropic settled a lawsuit by a bunch of authors for having trained on pirated copies of their books and probably most of the journal articles from most of the people who've written anything here. And you know, there's the issue of whether it's fair use, but this comes back to the point Ava was making about these models being open science. And one of the hallmarks of open science, of course, is crediting where your sources came from, crediting where the work came from, which is kind of not possible with these sorts of LLMs. So I'm curious, just your thoughts on sort of how to handle the ethics of that going forward.
I have a thought that maybe I'll start it with. So the first production level models, they did this scraping of just everything possible that you can get on the internet, including Reddit, including all these other places. That information might not be the source of truth that we want to build our model on. I believe it's Microsoft developed a model that was trained on very specific materials, known science textbooks. I'm hoping they did this more legally than Anthropic did. And it performed much better, was much smaller. So there's a sign that you don't actually need this scrape everything, including gray zones and stuff you're not supposed to take. So I think there's a way forward. I don't know what that does for the behavior that's already happened, and those models are the foundation for a lot of stuff. It's a gray area to me, or there's tension there at least.
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest challenges for, the use of AI and big data is both in privacy generally and intellectual property and that kind of thing. Like when does information that's shared publicly, at what point does that piece of information, when integrated into a model, cease to be that person's piece of information? And these are questions that I can't even begin to answer or solve. I mean, I think the biggest thing we need, there is a huge need for, explicit policy on what you can and can't do, and then we'll argue for decades about whether the policy is right. but right now there's a big vacuum, a lot of lack of guidance at every level, everybody dealing with big data and AI,
I think, so there's sort of at least two aspects of what you were talking about, right? There's sort of a scientific ethics issue in the sense of properly crediting ideas, right? And that's important. I think that one is, at least in theory, an easy one to solve in that cite the real things, right? So it could be that ChatGPT gives you an idea or gives you a fact, and there are starting to be techniques for citing ChatGPT, but that's the wrong solution to this, right? The right solution is going back to kind of what I said about we need to verify the facts anyway. So verify the fact, go out and cite the real place where that came from, right? You have a responsibility as a purveyor of knowledge generation to do the right thing there. On the sort of on the other side of it, the rights of people who are writing things and the one of the things that I think I'm really worried about, which I think makes your point kind of crystal clear, is so much of ChatGPT's ability to be really, really helpful with programming was because it was trained on Stack Overflow. And new submissions and new answers in Stack Overflow have gone off a cliff, right? And so this means that ChatGPT is going to probably, I mean, it's sort of an empirical question, but to the extent that that story is true, ChatGPT is going to be worthless for any new stuff that came out after 2020 or 2025 or whatever. And what are we going to do about that? And I think we need to be creative about thinking about solutions, because this is not a genie we can put back in the bottle. And so, is it the kind of thing where we need to be taxing those companies a lot and then using that money to create redistributive payments to the people who generated, I don't know, that's an idea that people have talked about, and that may not work, but, I think the solution is going to have to be something creative, or there's not going to be any solution at all, and we're just going to be screwed on this front, but,
Yeah, I don't know either. So I know there are a lot of ongoing lawsuits also with, I think, New York Times with OpenAI, where a lot of these models were trained on proprietary texts or things that are protected by intellectual property. The technical aspects of that, I don't really understand. I know people who are working on these lawsuits, there are people who are statisticians or mathematicians who are trying to develop ways to prove whether your materials are actually generated or derived from the original text of those IP-protected resources. And those are the pieces I don't understand, but I think in terms of the legislation for AI in general, there's hopefully a lot of places where now it's a wild zone right now, and it needs law, but I think the current government is also trying to discourage over legislation or restriction on AI as well. And in terms of a user of these models, I don't know how I can credit back to the sources that these models were trained on. I just think it will be really difficult.
There are techniques emerging to be able to actually work backwards, right? So you can, at least in theory, figure out the extent to which different kinds of input contributed to the information structure in the model and things like that. So it is certainly possible that there's sort of going to be a technological answer to credit assignment that can end up happening, but there will have to be people who are motivated to spend the time and money to figure all that out.
So change has been a through line through a lot of this conversation, changing the way you ask the questions, changing the way you answer the questions. So kind of a retrospective question kind of is, as an aspiring grad student, academic psychologist, so be it, what kind of changes would you make, if any, to the ways in which you kind of tackled your early inquiries and kind of the processes that you use to get where you are now utilizing AI and LLMs, if you would change anything?
And changes in what we did as grad students?
Yeah, as grad students, as you were getting acquainted with the work, as you were familiarizing yourself with the field, I guess a more explicit question would kind of be, do you think if you could do it all over, if you had to do it all over again, would you stick to the methods you used, or do you think that you would, for lack of a better term, kind of use shortcuts or ways to speed up the process with AI and LLMs to kind of help you with those, understand those seminal readings, learn how to write, all of that stuff?
For me, if that was available when I was a grad student, then definitely. I think even right now, when I read papers, if there are things that I don't understand, or when I'm trying to review some of the mathematical things or try to read a proof, I still use LLM for help. If there's a line I don't understand, I think it's extremely helpful for me to read papers. And writing as well, I think in general it's very helpful for proofreading for me. And in terms of programming, when I was a student, that was when I thought programming in C++ was a skill that was quite unique to myself. But now I learn about how some of the other grad students in our discipline, they can just use large language models to translate their code, for example, in R to C++, within a few seconds. And they can design the kind of unit test to make sure that it's doing the right things once you translate that. And it's becoming so much faster than trying to do everything myself.
I'm kind of happy that I was unaware of some of these tools when I was in grad school, because they were in their infancy, they existed, and I'm kind of happy they weren't as impressive and useful as they have become. Because in order to responsibly use a lot of these things, you've got to be able to do it the hard way with the help of AI. And I don't know. I'd like to think that I was a strong-willed enough student to make myself do everything the hard way, learn it really thoroughly. That way, when I ask AI for help or I have AI do a task, I can evaluate it thoroughly. I can look right at the code it spits out at me in the languages I code in well and go, that's wrong. And I actually understand why, most of the time, why it gave me that answer. But had I started using it much earlier, would I have that level of skill? So in that way, now, can it speed up? Are there things that I sat and did by hand for hours and hours that could have been done easily by a machine that I think, oh, wow, if this had been around, it would have been so helpful? Yes. So it's hard to say one way what I'd do different. I would encourage people to have as in-depth a knowledge on the topics, especially the ones central to your proposed discipline, as possible, because you're going to have to make these evaluations of these tools, and I don't think there's a shortcut to that.
Yeah, I mean, the intuition at a high level for me is really easy to answer, but then the practical advice is really hard, right? It's like, is there value to being able to compute a correlation or a t-test by hand, at least at some point in your career? Yes, it helped you understand the concepts. Is there value to being able to calculate a multivariate mixed level model by hand? Probably not, right? Although maybe, because actually we don't understand how multivariate mixed effects models work a lot of the time, right? Maybe we would actually even gain by some of us knowing how those work by hand, right? And so I think but at some level, right, the answer to that is yes, it's fine to turn it over to an algorithm because you understand the basic concepts and it is just saving you time. But I really do worry that for a lot of people, if you introduce it too early, it is going to just completely just block their ability to learn all sorts of important things, right? I can use LLMs to vastly increase my productivity with Python. I also feel it making me dumber with basic Python, right? I'm losing my memory of basic syntax because I know I can just look it up so much easier than I could before. And so, I mean, this is just something you have to wrestle with. In any given domain, it's giving you advantages and it's also taking something away. And it's not always straightforward in any given situation if that trade-off is a good thing or a net plus or whatever. And the answer might not be the same for different people or at different stages in their career and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's something we have to think really hard about. And it makes me very conservative about introducing LLMs too early into the education process. I think my general tendency, I've taught the BCog programming class and I don't have them use it in there. I think they should have at least one semester of programming where they have to do it all themselves. At some point though, you need to learn how to use it. It's going to be such a big part of doing everything in the future that it does need to be introduced somewhere, and I don't really know where the right answer is.
I sort of wonder what is we talked about speed, it helps you do things quickly. What is the actual goal that we are valuing here? Is it, I'm going to produce more publications? There are so many publications. We don't need more publications. We need better publications. We need the ability to get enough publications and still have energy and time to do community work or to do personal growth, whatever it is. It shouldn't be something that says, oh, I've got this tool, now I can do 7 more papers, right? That's to me seems like the wrong direction to go in.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
I know we talked about the methods a little bit with using LLMs. I was just wondering what your preferences or opinions might be on using AI to generate stimuli that is supposed to emulate a real world situation or thing or person or anything like that.
I've never used it for generating stimuli, so I will not answer this question.
I've seen people using it in video games a lot. And the video games are designed to mirror real-world conversation. And then you type in your answer, and everyone AI generates their responses. So I've seen people do it that way. Is that what you have in mind, or here's an image that I'm going to show a participant?
I was thinking images or photographs of maybe people or maybe voice recordings or literally anything. I was just curious, wanted to pick your brains.
Yeah, I know people are doing that, especially in social personality.
I think Professor Bernadette Curdy is doing some of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's definitely common in psychology of language. People are finding it useful. Probably, makes sense that people studying language would find language models helpful. I mean, it has all the same concerns. It would kind of have, so we had a discussion about this in our language brown bag on Wednesday a little bit, and it has the same pros and cons of a lot of the other things we've been talking about, right? If you turn over too much of your critical thinking to the algorithm, then there are going to be all kinds of problems and mistakes and biases and all kinds of things in there. But you also don't want to make the mistake of thinking that a person generating stimuli is free of all of those issues either, right? And so I mean, it really is, to me, a lot of this stuff, a lot of these hard questions to me are empirical questions that we need to be studying. We need to know. Like, there are going to be times when the stimuli that you generate are better, and there are going to be times that are worse. There are going to be times that they're going to be biased in some bad way, and there are going to be times that they're less biased, and it's just something that we need to learn a lot more about. I think we should definitely be open to it, but we should also be careful.
I can think of only one time, a couple years back, we did a project where we wanted to manipulate images of office environments and have people rate what things they thought about the people in those office environments based on the images. And the student came to me and was very excited about, like, we can use AI to generate these images. But it proved to be more difficult than actually going in and staging, because we played around it, and it's an issue both of like what AI does and of prompt engineering. We couldn't get it to do what it could do it. It's clear it could do it, but we couldn't get it to do it, to create the images we want and keep things the same between sets of images with the manipulations between them. So it was a case where it was neat. We wanted to explore it and see if we could get it to do it, but ultimately we just, took a few offices and the props we wanted and got out cameras and took pictures, and it was easier and faster. So that's an example. What we take from that, as far as like whether I think it's a good idea or not, and this was 2 years ago, maybe it'd be easier now, because by the month or by months, these things improve generation to generation. So.
Yeah, we'll get the mic to the back and then we'll.
Hello. Yes. One thing I think that I find interesting about LLM specifically and their output is a possible rise in what I call, I guess, absurdity in a way, in the sense of no longer knowing or being able to take at face value whether something you see or read is from a human agent or from an LLM. I was wondering if you think that this, I guess, disconnect is something that you see affecting how us as people use and consume the information around us. I guess to put that in other words, do you see, have you, I guess, thought about this question of, I guess, what I call absurdity, and to what extent do you think that has the ability to affect our way of going about the world?
Well, I know there's a growing literature about employee applicant, like job applicant and customer reactions to AI, like organizations using AI to drive chatbots to help you instead of a customer service representative, even AI being used evaluate resumes and CVs and things like that. So organizations employing these methods are very concerned about people's reactions to it. I think this is not exactly what you're talking about, but kind of tangentially related to what you're talking about. So people are concerned, organizations are concerned about it. People have varied reactions depending on the context and actually the outcome. So it depends on how useful and appropriate they are to the context. It's not necessarily a completely new thing. Like some of the older people in the room will remember a time when you always got a real human on the phone when we used the phone to talk to an organization. So that movement from there, it's just the technology's getting smarter and has more capabilities.
To clarify, I guess about that last point, well, I guess what I mean by the absurdity is the not knowing whether it's the human or the bot, I guess. And how does that affect our interpretation of, for example, every email I read and every poster I see? Do you think that has the ability to affect, in kind of greater culture, the way that we consume information? Do you think it has, like, it very well could not, and people will go about the world the same way. But part of me thinks there is this possibility for a greater paradigm shift in very much just not being able to take a lot of things at face value as coming from an embodied human agent. Do you, I mean, not that any of us are perfect predictors ourselves, but I'm just wondering, I guess, if you think that slight fear is something that could possibly come to fruition, or if not, I guess.
Well, I definitely think it's going to impact things. A lot of organizations are very interested in people's trust in AI systems, and generally how people respond to information coming from these sources. So it definitely has an impact. Now, to predict what that will be, how it will impact humans as a whole, I look forward to the research that answers those questions. I look forward to living in that future, maybe.
Maybe. I mean, you can think of think about the soon to be very real problem of like deepfake video, right? So we are very shortly going to be overwhelmed with all kinds of things that are, did you use the term nonsense or what? I don't remember what your term was, but things that are going to force us to change how we evaluate stuff. And it's going to be different in different domains, right? I'm sure there are probably plenty of journal editors in the room here who can probably speak to the fact that they are getting a massive increase in effectively AI-generated journal submissions, and that's a problem that they have to deal with, and the solution in that domain will be different than how we deal with the sort of epistemic value of video, and that'll be different from, in just every domain it's going to be different, right? Neil Stephenson had a good book about where this was kind of an issue, he, I think, coined the phrase, the in-shitification of the internet, right? And it's and the consequences that had for the world, right, in the science fiction book he was writing. And yeah, it's going to be something we're going to have to deal with. And at least in some domains, we can be optimistic that it will force us to actually raise our epistemic bar to a point where it should have been all along, even when we were dealing with real content from real people, but we were, trusting people for bad reasons, right? And so it could turn out good, but there's obviously a lot of potential for downside too.
I feel like maybe you'll be, for entertainment, you might be interested in some of the work done in the human-computer interaction literature, where they study how some of these large language models and generative AI can change the society and people's perception about things. Two things that I can think of is first related to misinformation and disinformation, and how much easier right now it has become for you to generate, say, deepfake videos or photographs that are very elaborated product of these disinformation. And if I remember correctly, the American public's trust for the media, public media, is at historical low right now. So could be related to this for other reasons. And the other is related to how people use AI might lead to further selective exposure of information, just like how these social media and recommendation engines have been creating some kind of echo chamber. So I recently read a paper about generative echo chamber, which is how you interact with like a chatbot. An AI-based chatbot can maybe reinforce some of the knowledge and views you already have in like maybe a more severe way compared to the existing selecting exposure through social media. So these are things that probably can increase polarization in the future as well. I know that there are also some people who are interested in a lot of these like famous large language models are trained on like mainstream culture or like English language. In the long term, how is it going to change people's understanding of some of the more underrepresented cultures and languages? And this is going to change people's values and the cross-cultural values as well.
Yeah, I took your question maybe slightly differently, speaking to current events maybe. This is something that does very much worry me, that we have people saying, no, don't believe that video, don't believe this video, but do believe this one. I'll stick to Leo's kind of framing of thinking about it as a company, but if you have a CEO who says, don't believe that video of people throwing bags out windows, but do believe this other one that looks like a movie, an action movie, you should believe that. But then the other people say, actually, it's all AI. How do you believe that? Who do you believe? No one's trustworthy. That seems real scary to me.
As I guess a quick follow-up to both that and what Dr. Willits said, where does the responsibility lie in a lot of these expectations? Because while I agree, like, to be able to kind of use these things and to go about them in a healthy and productive way, there's a lot of guidance and kind of teaching necessary. Part of me feels like it's a bit utopian almost to expect that we can achieve that.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, where do you see that responsibility lying? And do you think it's, I guess, achievable? Because I know, I guess, when, I forget who mentioned it, but something about teaching people how to use LLMs. But you're not teaching them how to use LLMs. You're teaching them how to use them responsibly, or how to use them for X, Y, and Z. Because anyone who knows a language can use it from the get-go. And even after you teach them something, they can still just use it however they want to. And it's very, I guess, kind of seductive in a way. It's very easy to rely on. I guess with all that being said, do you think that this responsibility, I guess, we have of using these things responsibly, how should we go about doing that and enforcing that? And can we expect these expectations to even really take hold?
I mean, they have to, right? Or we're screwed. So, I mean, I think like you can kind of see like human society has gone through many technological and social transitions, and they've brought about dramatic upheaval and potential for bad sides. And so far, anyway, we've gone through a lot of these transitions and developed a set of cultural and legal practices that let human society keep going, right? And I mean, we have to do that again with this, and it's going to be hard. And I do think this period that we are entering will be as big of a deal as, some of the biggest transitions in human history, right? Because we will have to develop structures to deal with kind of some of the stuff that you're worrying about, or things will really go off the rails. But I guess I am an optimist about human progress and society and all those kinds of things. Like, many worse things have come along, nuclear weapons came along, and people could have not followed the norms and just started doing all sorts of crazy things, right? And you can kind of think about, industrialization, and obviously, like, maybe we didn't quite handle that one quite perfectly, and we are dealing with a lot of the consequences of that. But it also could have gone a lot worse, right? We could have literally poisoned the entire world and all died off 100 years ago, right? So, but environmental rules were put into place to make sure that you couldn't just dump stuff into the rivers and all sorts of things. Now, some of those are being rolled back right now, but that's a different issue. So, I mean, we're going to have to figure that stuff out. And, I mean, the responsibility is on all of us, right? And everyone has their own politics and how democratic versus authoritarian you think this is going to have to go down. But yeah, we got to figure it out.
Thank you.
Yeah, when are we ending at 4:20? Is that about when, or 4:30?
We have the room until 4:30.
Okay, we got 10 more minutes. All right, cool.
I don't
Then
have
yeah.
to ask if we don't have time.
Oh no, we do have time. Yeah.
Oh, okay, is this working? Yeah. One, I actually don't know whether this is a real problem or a perceived problem, so I'm actually very curious to what you think about this. I think a fun little paradox of large language models is we've had Google. We've had Google for a number of years, and Google publishes a lot of documents. And so our way of obtaining knowledge was to go on Google and to say, hey, Google, tell me this thing. And then Google will list you results ranked on what they think is most relevant. But that doesn't give you the knowledge. You then have to click on the document, which was created by an individual, in order to gain that knowledge. And now we have sort of like these language models can, in essence, create their own documents. So it's no longer like, hey, GPT, what do I do about this? And it says, well, here's 3 documents that might answer your question. It just answers your question. And as a result, it reduces the need for those documents to exist in some sense, because no one's reading the documents anymore. It's just reading the synopses of the documents generated by the system. And this works right now because we're like right on the horizon. So there's a lot of people still using Google, a lot of people still using the internet. But I wonder about what happens in 10 or 20 years when people are so used to using the generated summaries of information from language models that no one is writing the documents that the language models are being trained on to get the information to answer the questions. Yeah, and so with that in mind, I don't know if that applies as much to science as it does to like BuzzFeed articles. But do you anticipate the need for what we include in our, do you anticipate a modality change in the types of things we include in our papers? Whether it's just invisible prompt scripts telling the AI exactly what to scrape from our papers and what to ignore, which I know papers have already included them on to keep reviewers from using AI to review the papers. Yeah, sorry, that was very open-ended. Do you kind of get what I'm saying?
One thing I found very, well, I'll start with the impressive thing that LLMs can do is I go to a new content domain and I get a bunch of information all at once. It's so great. It's a million different things. I've also taken time to very explicitly say, I want to go back and read William James's Pragmatism from 1907. It's an amazing read if you haven't read it. I want to go back and read The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, just in case it's relevant. Another incredible book from the 60s, I think. I do think you need to actively take some time to go and read the documents. I'm hoping that it doesn't become a situation where no one is reading the documents. It's when we're doing our big search or survey, we're getting a bunch of information, that's when we do those. We still need to take time for those other things. Do others have a thought, or do I get the final word? Yeah, John, yeah.
I can't remember where there was a podcast I was listening to that was talking about a very related topic, and it had to do with like advertising brochures and I can't remember what the reason was, but there are all these advertising brochures that were created, whatever, like these prospectuses prospecti, I don't know, that were created by businesses about all these like products or financial instruments or whatever, and all these kinds of things, and how for whatever reason, like because of Google and because of the easy accessibility of all kinds of other information, a lot of companies stopped making these. But then actually now with the rise of LLMs, they've started making them again for the LLMs, right? So a lot of people are actually writing the documents for the LLMs. They know that the LLM is where people are going to get, or it's going to be like the final source that people use for information, but there's still a benefit for creating content for them. So at least in some domains, it's having like the opposite of your sort of intuition effect. But the Stack Overflow example I gave earlier, right? Like that's happening in that one. And so I think it's an interesting question, and it may not play out the same. Like, yeah, I don't think most of us in the room are like, I'm going to keep reading journal articles and not just using ChatGPT to learn about new science. But in other domains that may not be true. Yeah.
I don't know how much this is related to your question, but I also recently listened to a podcast about the early history of search engines and Google. And I think before Google's PageRank algorithm came out, a lot of search engines were based on searching keywords, and that was gamed by a lot of website developers because if you want your page about dog food to be ranked on the top, maybe just like put as much like dog keywords on your page as possible, and that's definitely not serving people's purposes of getting the high quality results. And how much this has changed since Google had new algorithms based on, say, PageRank and the later algorithms to improve the search. So I never thought so hard about your question before, but just now I think maybe because of how large language models work and how people are using it, maybe in the short term, maybe there are people who are going to try to game it to their benefits and change the way they do research. But hopefully, in the long term, we're going to design systems that can help us try to make sure that people are generating things that are actually helpful in general and informative to the public.
My question was about, so the issue with AI is that it's so, especially ChatGPT, affirmative. So whatever information we give it, it says, what a great idea, that's true, I can convince it of anything, 2 + 2 is 5. So I was wondering if we can kind of conceive of a future where AI is selective about what it learns, or in a way can learn things as false or make these true false judgments itself.
I found asking it to make computer code, so like write R code to count how many R's are in strawberry or whatever, that works really well. But if you just ask it to linguistically tell you, fails. So that's one way to get it. So code has to work or not.
Like if I tell it vaccines are really bad, and it learns this information, like is there a future where it could say, I'm trying to teach it vaccines are bad, and it says, this doesn't fit with what I know, and doesn't incorporate it into its.
I know there are some folks in computer science who are interested in like large language model pre-training, which is how do we like curate the highest quality resources for them to learn to do the right things. Sometimes they try tricks that you try to educate kids. For them, like maybe when you're trying to like tell them that this is something bad, give them context, like the historical context, and explain a lot about like why this thing, like an experiment in the past, was unethical. But I think they play with all sorts of methods, try to prevent like people gaming it in negative ways. And I don't know how well a job they're doing, to be honest.
And it already kind of exists to a certain extent that like large language models are created to not do some things. So like they could expand that into the kind of, but it's almost limitless, the kind of prompts you could give where this judgment would have to come into play. But like if you, I forget, I can't think of a specific example, but there are things, I think if you ask a large language models explicitly to help you cheat by doing something, it'll say, I won't do that. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So I would be concerned about what are the limits of what a large language model is programmed to not do for you versus do. That creates a whole nother set of problems, you know. So,
I mean, they use reinforcement learning to train it to be polite, and that went a little overboard, and to train it to not be sexist and racist and all sorts of other kind of things. But and those are all things that, at least in theory, you can specify some sort of an algorithm or rule that is generally applicable. Now that doesn't mean it actually works, or a lot of the people in the room who study exactly those kinds of things would say that's harder than you might think. But if you try to think about what it would mean to use reinforcement learning to train the model to only say stuff that's true, well, then you have to have a method for truth verification, and that's if we had that, right, a lot of problems in the world would go away, right? So that's like the very hardest problem that I don't think, they're ever going to be able to purely solve any more than we can as individuals, right? So.
And I think a lot of the chain of thought reasoning, like asking models to right now, reflect on, double check their answers and to have the specific thought processes, these things that they already implemented has gotten us to this point. When we think about when they didn't have it, maybe 1 or 2 years ago, it was making a lot more factual mistakes and doing a lot of crazy things.
Yeah, asking it to create a set of hypotheses and then follow a set of Bayesian rules for evaluating the relative posteriors of those hypotheses. Actually, there's papers on how that increases the performance of the models on doing it. I mean, there are ways you can get it to be better, but there's not going to be some silver bullet here to never say unfactual things. Right?
All right. We will end with that. There's a lot of promise, a lot of work still to be done, and we'll see you all back here next month for the first Friday colloquium. We'll continue these kinds of conversations. Thank you all. And thank you to our panelists.